All right, guys, welcome to Beyond the Muscle. I'm really excited to welcome our next guest, Dr. Eric Helms. Eric is one of the co-founders of 3DMJ and Mass Research Review. He's a pro natural bodybuilder and he's done a lot, so much, in fact, in the fitness space to educate and inform. And yeah, it's a real honor to have you here, Eric. So yeah, how are things going?
Oh, dude, thanks for that kind introduction. Things are going well. Looking forward to chatting. And yeah, man, I'm doing well. I'm
Mm.
competing in first weekend of October, so we're getting there.
Yeah, yeah, into the deep dark stages of prep, the fun part, I guess.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
every week you see a little change. It's nice.
Mm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's funny actually. So going back to I used to watch your 3DMJ's early videos, and I still recommend like the muscle and strength pyramids from like I think it was 10 plus years ago. And yeah, anyone who's getting into bodybuilding, I say, look, you got to watch those first. They're kind of fundamental. So I know you guys have got like books and that of the like now that have progressed things further, but yeah, I still love those videos. I think they're quite ahead of their time as well. But yeah, yeah, awesome
I'm
work there.
honored to hear that, man. Yeah, no, it was I remember it. I'd only been I'd only moved to New Zealand a few months prior, and I was propping up my S3 Samsung phone against my wallet on a chair on a desk, and then trying to write straight on a whiteboard. That was
Yeah.
the condition of my YouTube's state in late 2012, man.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. But the content was great, and that's the main thing, I guess. But
I wish that still held true today, my friend, but you need the bells and whistles. But
that's
no,
true.
no, in all seriousness, content still does need to be a big part of it. And can you believe we're on the third edition of the Muscle and Strength Pyramids, and they're going to drop into the year? It's pretty wild.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm going to keep an eye out for those, definitely. So yeah, one of the main areas I wanted to touch on today, Eric, was like genetics in natural bodybuilding and
Mm.
like specifically like what we can do to maximize like genetic potential and overcome limitations. So when it comes to bodybuilders who have done everything in their power to overcome limitations, you're definitely someone who springs to mind. Steve Hall is another, and there are a few other bodybuilders that are like when you really have to think hard about programming, that kind of thing.
Mm.
Before we do, I want to touch on your training at the moment, Eric. So obviously, I've been training a while, like 25 years now, almost. I know you
Wow.
have as well. I've had a bit of a growth spurt recently, having dedicated a bit more time to bodybuilding for the past few years. But with your own journey, how has progress been, like in your late 30s and going on into your 40s?
That's a good question, man. So yeah, I've got 21 years under my belt. I'm 42, so I've been training half my life. And I think a big thing for context for people to understand about my own personal journey is that I did my first competition in powerlifting in 2006, and then my first season in '07. So I've competed '07, '09, 2011, 2019. There's a big gap there.
Mm,
2023, and now I'm competing this year. And it's only been since 2023 that I have purely and exclusively focused on bodybuilding. It has always been a hybrid slash periodized approach with strength sport. So I've done like 20 powerlifting meets. I had a run, two runs actually, that both lasted about a year and a half to 2 years of weightlifting in combination with powerlifting.
mm.
And then even I had a run at doing weightlifting, strongman, all at the same time, and powerlifting. So I think that context is important because I've had moments of kind of like spurty growth here and there,
Mm.
times where my focus probably was more on strength, more on hypertrophy. But of course, I have always, and I think the data would support this as well as anecdote, believe that if you want to get stronger, you have to get bigger. So it's not like I ever was backsliding, but certainly there's been phases where things have gone better than others. So anyway, in my late 30s, in mid 30s, most of my training was very much dedicated to powerlifting because that was in the interim between 2011 to 2019, those two seasons. Um, and I made a commitment after I came out to New Zealand to do my second master's, my PhD, that I wouldn't go through a contest prep because I didn't think it'd be like the right thing to do for my research, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, my first um, time point where I had a really, really dedicated period of hypertrophy training was actually right after my PhD finished in 2017.
Right.
So from I got hip surgery in 2017, which is some other important context.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I had bilateral FAI surgery, which took me out of being able to do heavy squats and deadlifts for about a 24-week period. And importantly, for years prior to that, I had limitations that I had to train around it. But I
Mm.
was still training,
Yeah.
obviously. But I don't think it actually held back my growth. I think it just held back my squat and deadlift.
Mm.
So, with all that context, I think it's important to understand I had a really good run late 2017 after I'd fully recovered from surgery, because that was like in Feb, through 2018, because I knew I was going to get on stage 2019.
Mm.
Um, Finished my PhD in 2017, and the real delay for me getting back on stage was that I hadn't
Yeah.
competed in powerlifting since 2016. So there
Mm.
had been a window there because of PhD plus hip. So I had a really good spurt in 2018, and I competed in 2019, and my physique was light years ahead of where it was in 2011.
Yeah.
Um, but of course, wasn't just due to that. I think there's a huge component of time.
Mm.
Um, my powerlifting total had gone up from the 500s into the low 600s, over
Yeah.
that time, um, since I moved to New Zealand, and of course I was training. So it was like slower but still progressive growth through that time
Mm.
period in my 30s, and I was definitely seeing probably a greater spurt of growth once I had focused a little more on the bodybuilding, just with adjunct maintained strength kind of approach.
Yeah.
And then after that, my best growth that I have seen probably since 2011, 2012 range, and into like the early teens. Um, which I'll contextualize in a moment, which is right around 29 to like 32. The
Mm.
best growth I've had has been in the last 2 years.
Okay. So
So,
it's your 2023 season.
yes.
Mm.
So, yeah. And both of those two times where I've had incredible growth that were not just my newbie gains were when I experimented with more volume than was kosher at the time. I think social norms dictate a lot of what we do in bodybuilding more than we realize.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. There's a rich history of, bodybuilding since Eugen Sandow in the, you know, 1900s, 1890s. So like we don't want to not stand on the shoulders of giants, but I think
Mm.
sometimes we need to be willing to color outside of the lines if our pens don't seem to work the same way everybody else's do,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, 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 that's great. Yeah, I definitely want to delve into that volume, chatting it in a little bit more detail. But as you've got older, must I say that? So if you're not old, obviously you've got plenty more growth in you. But would you say your physique has adopted like a slightly different look at all?
A little bit.
Okay.
So I had far less vascularity in my 20s and in my
Mm.
youth than I do now. I have much more vascularity in my arms. I can see it throughout my body, and I just generally have um, a harder look in certain areas.
Mm.
Um, I don't know. I can tell you what I think that is because I understand why people get this. The muscle maturity thing.
Yeah, I spoke
Um,
to Alberto Nunez when he was on about that, and he said something similar. The muscles get more densely packed, but without getting actually bigger. That was his way of describing it. Yeah,
it's what it looks like.
yeah, yeah.
I don't think there aren't changes in muscle density, but I've looked at enough muscles with ultrasound, and
Mm.
I've looked under the hood. I've read enough research. The scientist in me, it doesn't really buy that this is a density thing.
Hmm.
I think there are I don't think all adaptations happen over the same time course. So I think you are seeing things in changing to the blood supply. You are seeing things potentially in changes in size. You are maintaining a lower body fat. And I
Mm.
also think that there's like a peak skin thinness. So this is a legit thing. Like
Yeah,
your
yeah.
skin does actually reduce thickness over time as you age. There's changes to the connective tissue matrix in skin, and you eventually lose elasticity. And you can see this in older individuals, like quite, elderly people, like in
Yeah.
their final couple decades of life, you can see that their skin just hangs on certain parts of their body. But if you run the clock back a decade prior to that, it doesn't. And
Mm,
unless they used to be very, very heavy, the skin is still sufficiently elastic to still be relatively tight to the tissue underneath, but it's still thinner. So I do think
mm,
probably somewhere in your like 30s, 40s, and 50s, along with being able to maintain a leaner physique, be able to get leaner because you are simply, more experienced as a competitor,
yeah.
and you have improved, and maybe some changes to muscle density and quality, blood supply, so you have more veins, and there's more just detail to be seen.
Mm,
I think that creates the what we describe as muscle maturity. So I
mm.
think generally in your 40s is probably that peak point where your skin has lost some thickness but not too much elasticity and you can just see more of the shit underneath. That's what
Yeah.
I think muscle
Yeah.
maturity is.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really interesting. Yeah, it's funny because I first stepped on stage at 31, so I was already, I had already been training for maybe 12 years, and now I'm 41. So yeah, a bit further down the road, but I haven't really seen much change in terms of that kind of muscle maturity that they call it. But there's still time.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's still more training to do. Moving on to the topic of genetics, obviously this is a very broad topic, certainly as it pertains to like
Mm.
to bodybuilding. But how much do you think natural bodybuilders should be concerned with genetics, just beyond like having a knowledge that it's an important thing?
Very little.
Yeah.
Um, I think ultimately we never know what constrains or allows progress. We just know whether we're having it or not. And
Mm,
if you're not, you need to do something about it. So I think from a practical perspective, that's about it. I think the other thing though is that it's very difficult to enjoy the sport without having some degree of realistic expectations
mm,
and pushing yourself to agree, trying to figure out what your potential like reach goal is,
yeah.
right? So so for example, I'm setting myself the goal for the longest time of just trying to turn pro, right? And then now that I turn pro, it's like, well, let me see if I can snag like a top 5 placing at Worlds. And that is an ambitious goal that I may or may not achieve, but it's not something that people would look at my last appearance and go, impossible,
Mhm.
right? Like you're delusional. And there are some people who really do love those big, hairy, audacious, delusional goals and one day be a world champion. And I think there's a time and a place for that. Like
Mm,
in your first couple years of training, you don't even know what you can achieve or where your physique will take you. Like baseline muscularity is not a strong predictor of where you might end up going,
right, right.
because some people start under muscled.
Mm,
Like if you are kind of your chronic under eating skinny guy,
yeah.
you might find that just by increasing your calories, to where they should be, that you would walk around 10 pounds heavier of lean body mass, and that
Mm,
would be your quote unquote natural weight. And we see a lot of transformations like that. So I think like in my first couple years of training, because I started lifting in 2004, and I remember my first season in my first couple years, I put on like 25 pounds of muscle because I was one of
mm,
those skinny guys. And I mean like 25 pounds of weight, and my physique stayed roughly the same composition within the first 6 to 12 months. So
yeah.
I had good genetics for like my initial weight gain.
Mm,
But in many other ways, I think I have not great genetics, which we'll describe. Because genetics to put on muscle and genetics to be good at bodybuilding are not 100%. But
mm,
I remember in 2006, 2007, I was like, my goal is to win the Natural Olympia, win WBF Worlds.
mm,
I don't know that that's real. Maybe not. They have the classic physique division. I have some potential option of doing better, because I
yeah,
think
yeah.
of the way I'm judged might be a little more favorable for that. We'll see.
Mm,
But but I think in the bodybuilding division at the time when that's all there was, that
mm,
was an unreasonable goal if someone looked at where I started and what I did in the first couple years. But any experienced bodybuilder were like, well, let's see where you are in 10 years.
yeah.
Now we know, right? And that became an increasingly less realistic goal for me. So
Mm,
then as I gained maturity, I started to focus on, well, okay, can I turn pro one day? That'd be cool.
mm,
So now the reason I say that's important is that it's very difficult to get all the wonderful benefits from competitive natural bodybuilding if you set a goal that is too far out.
Yeah.
Um, because your primary motivation to keep you in the game for the long run is I want to be the best version of me. I want to fill my cup,
Mm.
right? And knowing that you have, a limitation to that. But it's a pretty good limitation for natural bodybuilders in that you're fighting against father time. It's
Yeah.
sarcopenia, like
Mm.
you're going to eventually get the downward pressure of age, but the good news is for us not running gear and actually harming our health and accelerating that. Um, we're talking 50s, 60s, in some
Yeah.
cases. Look
Yeah.
at Marshall Johnson,
Hmm.
like Jeff Alberts. There's plenty of examples. So I think anyway, if you want to complement that intrinsic motivation of I want to be the best version of myself with a little bit of extra juice on top to be like, oh, but I am a competitor. I want to see how far I can take it.
Yeah.
You need to have a realistic idea because maybe it's, hey, I win a pro show or I place top three or I place top five or I turn pro. Or maybe, I make it out of, I win a novice class and then I
Hmm.
can place top three in an amateur division in a good show. All those things are super viable, and if you can figure out what is appropriate for you, then that extra goal striving is important. And a
Mm.
big, big, big part of that is genetics,
Yeah.
and genetics for natural bodybuilding. I mean, you know as well as I do, man. And this is a dog and pony show,
Mm.
right? Like you can pick people out once you've been in the game long enough, and especially if you're coaching. You could go to just any university campus, and in the summer, people are wearing skimpy clothes, and you look at some of the people and you go, see that dude who's never touched a weight. He
Mm.
doesn't have any size on him, but he's got a big rib cage, broad shoulders, and a small waist, and the right like muscle attachments and hip structure.
Mm.
If he lifted weights, even if you put on just a small amount of muscle,
Yeah.
he would do really well.
Hmm.
So those are things that skeletal structure and height combination and
Mm.
muscle attachments is completely independent from how much muscle can you put on.
Mm.
Um, and then there's a whole other thing of if we're talking about the bodybuilding division,
Yeah.
to be competitive, you have to get so lean. So, who is also seemingly like if you see that guy and he's eating a massive burger, but he's got a six pack and he doesn't seem to give a shit about anything in the world and
Yeah.
related to he's not like getting the food scale out to track his burger,
Mm.
and you're like, ah, that's probably a good sign. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
he's got a low intervention point. He's not someone who struggles with the modern environment impacting his physiological ability to stay near it.
Mm.
And he's probably going to be able to get leaner and not deal with quite as much as the struggle of the contest prep
Mm.
process. So those are all parts of it. And then the final thing, as you know, is bodybuilding is such a marathon,
Yeah.
and you have to be willing to turn over the big rocks, the stones, and the grains of sand to really eke out everything you have. And there's a certain personality that is required to compete in bodybuilding. You have to have a degree of neuroticism, but not crippling neuroticism. You have to have a degree of the ability to be like focused, but not have it be all consuming.
Mm.
Um, and you have to have the ability to delay gratification, and not be too impulsive. So, but also be willing to push yourself. And all of those things have genetic components. Some of them are very
Yeah.
trainable, but there is probably like those are like five buckets that we could put genetics into.
Yeah, true. And then, yeah, not all of them even physical, it seemingly. So yeah, so true there. Yeah, no, I love what you said about having an awareness of it, but yeah, you can't let it take over. It's funny because when I first competed, I didn't even think about genetics at all. I was very clueless. I got my knowledge mostly from you guys at 3DMJ, and yeah, I went to my first show and I won. I won an overall in my very first attempt. Yeah, without any coach. And I thought, oh, this bodybuilding is so it's easy. It's yeah, it is. Then I understood that obviously you can over diet and the balance between size and shape is very, very important. But yeah, that unfortunately doing so well at my first show, it gave me slightly unrealistic expectations of what to expect because I just had the ability to get very, very lean and yeah, with some decent genetics. And I thought, okay, this, yeah, I can do really, really well here. But yeah.
Yeah.
Hasn't happened just yet, but we're still pushing. But yeah, no, I
Well,
love
I
the way you
mean,
framed them.
you're very good.
Mm,
And the thing is that that's another thing is your perception also really impacts this. Like you kind of scale your own progress relative to people who are better than you if you're a
yeah, yeah.
competitive person, right?
Mm,
So, if you win your first show, you turn pro, now all of a sudden you're comparing yourself to pros.
mm,
If you place fourth out of four in your first open category, like this guy over here,
mm,
but you win the novice category, then you're like, oh, well, I'm kind of middle of the pack, but not, but in the broad scheme, not that good. So
right.
who do I look to,
Yeah.
right? So, and that can affect your motivation and the way you perceive things. And the funny thing is, like, how many bodybuilders actively admit I have good genetics? You know,
Mm,
very rare. And you get like Olympias and world champions who go, despite my bad genetics, I got here. And it's like,
right. Yeah.
like, you know what? I'll give you an honest example for the OGs who are followed the sport for a while. I would say Brian Whitaker is a good example of someone with good bodybuilding genetics,
Hmm.
but not great, but still good enough to be a world champion,
Yeah.
which there's just a certain threshold you got to clear. Like his symmetry is perfect. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing that's out of balance, but there's nothing that stands out.
Yeah.
He doesn't have an incredibly wide, like shoulder structure. I wouldn't say he's narrow, but there are definitely wider bodybuilders.
Mhm.
He doesn't have any crazy attachments or muscle bellies or anything like that, but there's no flaws. And then you layer on top of that his willpower, his mindset, his dedication, and the fact that he can get incredibly lean and that he's
Yeah.
big enough and that he knows how to just like pop and he's an excellent poser and he seeks that feedback. And when he peaks well, all that comes together and he can beat a Siobhan Cunningham, right?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing where we look at that and we're scaling him to the best in the world and we go, oh, he did really well despite not having good genetics. It's like, come
Hmm.
on, like Brian Whitaker has incredible genetics.
Yeah.
We're comparing him to other world champions,
Mm,
so I think that's just something to be aware of too, is we kind of um we 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 like scale things in a relative sense without really being really intentional about that sometimes. Like I have to be
yeah.
very careful. There's a lot of people who kind of hold me up as like, oh, Eric has like average genetics. I'm like, well, let's be honest. Like
Mm,
I run studies, like I see a ton of just untrained or recreationally trained people, and every gym I've ever been in, every typical commercial gym,
hmm.
every study I've participated in, every lab that I've worked in, and there's been a few, and except for when like there's a other random freak, I'm the biggest, strongest guy I've ever met.
Right.
Like
Right.
without the internet, I would have a huge inflated ego.
Hmm.
So there's just not that many people who can squat 500 pounds and
Hmm.
deadlift close to 600 and bench in the mid 300s and
Yeah.
who put on 30 pounds of muscle in their first 5 years after
Mm,
training. Like that's just I I used to think I had shitty genetics, and then I got into research and I'm like, wow, like the
mm,
number of people who can squat 300 pounds at my size is very rare.
yeah.
So it's just kind of one of those things where you tend to scale your own genetics to the community you're part of and where you're trying to get to, not where you are.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, really well put. And social media, obviously, yeah, bodybuilding selects for obviously the elite of the elite genetics, and social media just it amplifies that, doesn't it? 100%.
100%.
Um, Talking of training volumes, I wanted to go into this a little bit because I know, yeah, you push your upper body training volume pretty high. And yeah, it's a really interesting topic. So you push your upper body quite high, and I think you've said it 'cause it's given you a bit more balance to your physique and compared to your lower body over time. There definitely seems to be like a spectrum in terms of like optimal volume. Obviously, other bodybuilders in this space like Jeff Alberts, Alberto Nunez. There's a guy in the UK. I don't know if you're aware of him, but Ben Howard. He only trains three
Yep.
times a week with presumably quite low volume as well. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on this. So, would you say like muscle fiber type, like or distribution, is the big reason for this disparity, or like the reason why you see much better results with higher volume? Would you say?
Probably not.
No.
I think yeah, that's not something that is, you know, like the funny thing is that individual variation is very difficult to a test and then
Yeah.
describe or like explain, I should say. Um, there's a recent piece of research that I was part of, Dr. Zach Robinson of Data-Driven Strength. He actually did his PhD on this.
Right.
And the way, you know, like the way I used to state, hey, there's some people who are high responders and low responders in the research we would use is actually an inappropriate assessment of the research.
Mm.
And the most common design, say, for example, there's a 2019 study by DeMoss where people did it within participant design. So one limb does high volume, the other limb does low volume.
Mm.
And then we look and go, oh, wow, some people's limbs did better on lower volume, some people's limbs did better on higher volume.
Yeah.
And you would think that's an inherent trait or quality of them. Um, and the trends were pretty consistent, though. Like overall, higher volume limbs generally did better, but there were exceptions to that rule, right?
Mm.
To really know if that is a persistent outcome rather than variance and related to anything other than the fact that that's just the way that person responds,
Mm.
you would actually need to then flip and do the other the limbs the other way, and then
Right.
and actually like have a washout period because there's
Yeah.
environmental factors, there's measurement error, there's biological variation. So that's exactly what Dr. Zach Robinson did for his PhD research. You know, he brought people in, they did a higher or lower volume program based upon where they started,
Hmm.
unilateral within limb design, and then they did a washout period and re-randomized and did it again. So that way you can actually quantify these different buckets of variation and see, okay, are we seeing a repeatable trait-based characteristic in response to higher or lower volumes? And he did not.
Right.
But what he did see was that some people responded better to training in general, and that the more training you gave them, the better their response was. So
Okay.
this is in line with our large-scale meta-regression data now. That generally higher volumes,
Mm.
when we do it in the context of a study,
Mm.
not necessarily the ecologically valid real world where there's many other confounders, lead to higher volumes with a diminishing returns response.
Yeah.
Um, some people have better whatever. I'm not going to say genetics because it could have been they have a persistently better environment, or they're more dedicated, or they can, you know, whatever. Some people are higher responders, some people are low responders to training, but
Mm.
the dose of training is actually unsurprisingly, when you think about it, it has a pretty predictable response.
Hmm.
And if we really thought about what would it take? Because there's two ways we could try to explain the world around us, like a Ben Howard, for example.
Mm.
Um, do we actually think that he grows better on 3 days per week versus 6 days per week or more volume? Like if he does another set, somehow there's actually catabolic signaling in his
Hmm.
muscle. Like if we took his muscle, we put it in a petri dish, and then
Mm.
we actually applied tension outside of the context of his life, do we think his muscle is magic? It's special. So to where more tension equals less growth at a certain point.
Hmm.
Like what would be required in the structure of that muscle for
Yeah.
it to for mTOR to respond to lower volumes, you know, and you know, like when you
Mm.
really ask that question, you go, okay, hold on. So it's not that.
Yeah.
So what would it be? And this is where we put our coach's hat on. We just think about it. Well, we go like, all right, well, hypothetically, if he could recover and do higher volumes and have it be just as effective, he would probably grow better.
Yeah.
But what is most likely happening is that in his whatever environmental constraint interaction with soft tissue, you know, time demands, psychology, whatever combination of everything environmental and genetic, as well as you know, logistic and real world constraints that are on Ben Howard,
Mm.
him going above the current volume he does is constrained. And then he's just doing more work that has a recovery suck that hypothetically could stimulate that muscle, but for other factors, it's constrained.
Yeah.
So it's not that he has a different dose response curve, it's the ceiling is lower of what he
Hmm.
can respond to. And then the second thing is he has an excellent response to the volume he's doing, and
Mm.
he's getting every last little bit out of the volume that he's doing to
Yeah.
make it as effective as possible. So the real world best decision is, well, don't try to do higher volume. It either compromises the intensity, It makes it too challenging to sustain to or adhere to. You get injured more often, but the muscle itself would probably grow faster if you could stick to it.
Mm,
And I bet you, even if we took Ben Howard and we put him in a study that was 8 to 12 weeks long, so long as he could survive it and maintain the protocol, he might get bigger than if he did lower volumes, if he did a high
mm.
volume, study. But just because he could do that for 8 to 12 weeks doesn't mean he could sustain it as his approach for a 20-year bodybuilding career.
Yeah, yeah. No, really interesting. Yeah, I love that. It's a really tough one because I've actually been experimenting myself with slightly lower volume recently. I've been on like a 5 day split for as long as I can remember. But yeah, I just for a few reasons I didn't quite feel recovered. Motivation was a little bit lower, and it's early days, but I feel like I am getting slightly better results from switching from a 5 day to a 4 day split with a little bit less volume, like not drastically less, but
Mhm.
yeah, for me it does seem to be working, slightly better. And I think, yeah, some of those external factors are coming into play. Obviously, I'm a dad of two kids, and yeah, sleep's good, but it's not perfect, and yeah, there are other environmental factors at play. But it's interesting. I suppose maybe a beginner should start with a lower volume program and then scale things up gradually would be the best advice. But yeah.
I think so too. And the observation and research that higher volumes produce greater hypertrophy is shouldn't be conflated with a recommendation, you know.
Mm,
It's research describes the world around us, but doesn't necessarily give prescriptive advice immediately. So in my coaching experience, I can tell you what happens pretty persistently. And we saw this kind of like in the early days when Mike Israetel was all kind of in with maybe a little less nuance on the maximum recoverable volume tip.
yeah.
I saw this all over the place. We got a tremendous number of applications. We get these young guys who are doing a huge amount of volume, 20
Mm,
plus sets per muscle group.
hmm.
But when you look at the quality of the training and their proximity to failure, it was lacking.
Yeah.
And that that tends to be inverse. There's even a little bit of hint of this in the research. Like if you look at how many sets someone does and the number of reps they do per set and how much drop off there is,
Yeah.
there's some data that shows when someone's doing more total sets, you see less rep drop off, which means they
Okay.
don't maybe realize it, but they're pacing themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're stopping at a 3 RIR when it's supposed to be a 2. And then they can
Mm,
do another 3 RIR and another 3 RIR, because they're just not fatiguing themselves quite as much.
hmm.
So a very, very natural thing, and you see this in endurance sport literature, is that people pace themselves. And
Mm,
that's it's a performance strategy, and the better you get at it, the better the total outcome. Like this is very simple. If you run 100 meters and you're like, "Oh man, that was 10 seconds." Just do it twice. You can run a 20-second
mhm,
200 meter. That's not physically possible if that was
mhm,
actually your 10-second 200 meter, right?
mhm.
And you don't maintain a 200 meter pace for your 400 meter, and you don't
Yeah.
maintain a 400 meter for your 800 meter. You don't maintain an 800 meter for your mile. You don't maintain a mile pace for a half marathon for marathon, or an ultra, right? So when you are going to, because you saw something that excited you, you see this interview and you ignored all the nuance I tried to give, and you go, you know what? I'm currently doing a novice kind of 10 set per week split. I'm going right to 30
Mm,
because Eric Helms said you should just extrapolate directly from the data and not think at all. I didn't say that, but people do that, right?
mm,
When someone triples their volume or doubles their volume, the first thing that starts to happen is they get motivated, they do it for a while, and then they just find it's like, oh, this is really brutally hard and I can't
yeah.
maintain it. So exercise selection changes, rest periods elongate to a point, but then they just run out of time. They can't, they start choosing to, keep a little bit left, or they rest even shorter periods, and the load
Mm,
drops. There's consequences as to the effectiveness of each set. So that doesn't happen in research. And I think
mm,
that's a huge thing that people don't realize is you've got a room full of graduate students who are maybe even needing you to do this in a effect, like for them to get their master's or their PhD,
mhm.
right? So they're going to damn well be sure that you are finishing at the target RIR, that you are
Yeah.
they have a stopwatch, they have a list of exercises, and they have a target RIR, or you're going to failure. And if you can't sustain that, well, thank you very much, Tom, for participating, but we're going to have to ask you to stop the study because we don't think you're not able to follow the protocol, right?
Yeah.
So, or you piece yourself out, or you grit and grind it and finish after 12 weeks, and in the exit interviews, and this has been done. You see,
Mm.
that's the hardest I've ever trained in my life, and I can't sustain it,
Hmm.
right? But you're going to get the volume done at the
Mm.
prescribed intensity. You're not going to be pacing, and it's going to be matched to the other groups as best as possible, and certainly better than it would be in the real world, even if there is some drop off.
Yeah.
So, when someone does decide to do higher volume, they need to be ruthless about making sure that, okay, if my intention is to increase the dose of training.
Hmm.
I actually have to increase the dose of training,
Yeah.
not increase the volume and then decrease the intensity so the dose doesn't change and I'm just spending more time in the gym.
Mm.
So myself, again, I've been training for 21 years and I've gone through multiple phases of trying higher volumes, acclimating to it, finding that I was not progressing at the rate I wanted, not progressing at all, which is another important thing, and then upping the volume again.
Mm.
So when I look back, because you specifically called out my upper body, and I'm glad you did,
Mm.
um, my lower body, it's not that it, for one, I have a background in track and field, background in martial arts, and I just kind of have naturally bigger legs.
Yeah.
And that might be that athletic background, might be genetics, I don't know. So I was playing catch up with my upper body. And once I started doing high volume protocols, they caught up.
Mm.
And I would always say, like, I don't respond well to, I respond fine on lower volumes for my lower body. But what it really was is that I was growing, everywhere, even
Yeah.
with lower volumes. And when I would do higher volumes with the power building approach, I would get fucked up,
Mm.
and that's exactly what happened. I needed bilateral FAI surgery because I was trying to run an Olympic lifting program on top of a powerlifting program with some bodybuilding accessories.
Mm.
And when I would do high volume protocols, I was doing a high volume protocol with squats and deadlifts
Yeah.
and RDLs and good mornings. And I was very, very focused on, a very basic barbell based approach to leg training.
Right.
But in 2019, when my legs kind of stepped it up and I had the experience of having surgery, and I did some videos on this on Omar Isuf's channel and talked about it on a few of our podcasts. I was doing a whole lot more machine-based work and bodybuilding-based work, and my legs improved.
Right.
Um, so
Mm.
I took the constraints off of my lower body, and they started to respond better. And the upper body, I've found it's just I don't get beat up from training nearly the same degree. So the cap isn't there. And each
Mm.
time I've gone, well, let me see what I can handle right now and do a much higher volume. I blow up,
Yeah.
to varying degrees based upon my advancedness towards my own potential. And that's been no exception. And now with this overall approach to higher volume, in the off season, I was up to 25 to 35 sets per muscle group, closer to the lower end of that for the lower body and closer to the upper end of that for the upper body. But I built up to it.
Yeah.
I started closer to 20.
Mm.
Um, and I had been closer to 20 for years prior, on and off, depending upon the phase of training. And now during prep, I've necessarily had to reduce it a little bit.
Hmm.
So that is because now there's the constraint of prep. And the important thing to remember is that I am trying to place, like when I set out to do this, we're talking my 2020, end of 2023 season. I'm moving into my 2024 off season. I'm like, I'm going to start prep in April of 2025 to compete against the guys in the WNBF World Pro middleweight division, like
Yeah.
Babacar,
Mm.
Ibsen. Like these are monsters. So I need to make as much progress as I possibly can without getting hurt from now until then. Not let me find a good sustainable program.
Hmm.
So I think that's very different. Like,
Yeah.
does Eric Helms need 30 sets to grow? Almost certainly not.
Hmm.
But am I growing faster on 30 sets than
Hmm.
20? It seems like it.
Yeah. 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 That's something I hadn't really considered was the urgency of the situation almost. So, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Um, Yeah, they're really well put there. I remember actually Jeff Albert saying that he experimented, I think it might have been a chat with you actually, with lower volume, sorry, with high volume, and he wasn't getting recovered. In terms of recovery, Eric, obviously muscle soreness is something we can look at. I don't know how much stock can be put into this, but interestingly, my resting heart rate on my Apple Watch is always much, much higher after like a heavy leg session or even an upper body day. Are there any other metrics you'd pay attention to assess recovery at all?
You know, the funny thing about soreness, it if you look at some of the correlations with it, when
Mm,
soreness starts to come up, it's when your force output actually starts to come up too. So people are like, oh, don't train sore because you know you still
mm,
got damage. The soreness is actually more related to the recovery and repair process, and you're experiencing the inflammation.
mm,
The actual largest decrease in force output is the closer it occurred to the training, right? You know, like if you just did a 5 rep max 5 seconds later is when you're going to have the least, amount of ability to do that again. And if we
mm,
get outside of like, okay, we need to replenish ATP, it
yeah.
is the closer time period to it. So by the time you're experiencing DOMS, you are actually probably in the recovery process.
Hmm.
And soreness is so heavily impacted by the frequency of exposure,
Hmm.
um, that it's not the most reliable one for whether or not you should train or whether you're recovered. If it is actually altering your motor pattern and making you kind of inhibited, because pain does impact your ability to put out force, then yeah, it's not a great time to train.
Yeah.
But there's a pretty cool study by Gomez where they took the same volume and some genuine intermediate lifters and split it out over a 3 day split or like a bro split.
Mm,
And the soreness levels hit like 0 to 1 early on in this 8 week program on the 3 day per week split. Same volume.
right.
But in the other group, they maintained a soreness that was around 4 to 5.
Right.
So these things influence, our psyche. Like if you
Mm,
stick with a low frequency split, you're going to feel like that's the level of volume you can handle.
hmm.
But if you just try to
Mm,
split that volume up across 3 different days, so you're kind of doing like a full body-esque Monday, Wednesday, Friday versus a 5 day per week, kind of bro split,
yeah.
or something like that, whatever, you might find that soreness is no longer there, and that might
Hmm.
not feel like a constraining factor. So that's one thing that you can do. You can, before you try to leverage an increase in volume, you can leverage a redistribution in frequency.
Yeah.
Um, if you're training a 1 to 2 times a week program, take the same exact volume and switch to a 2 to 3 times per week
Mm,
frequency. And that's probably the first step. And you'll notice that you're just less sore and you are less achy and you feel like you could probably sustain a volume increase.
mm,
So that's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider is to videotape your sets and be very, very honest about proximity to failure.
mm,
Like, is my bar speed actually slowing down? Um, so ultimately, the question that people have watching this podcast is, what should I do to improve? How do I make
mm.
faster progress? People are, we're all capitalists when it comes to muscle gain, right? Regardless of your outside of muscle farming, your political beliefs or your economic beliefs,
Mm,
we're all about the bottom line. Everyone's going to be like, all right, so what should I do?
yeah.
And the volume relationship is heavily diminishing returns. So I think that's really important to understand. Going from 4 to 8 sets to 8 to 12 sets, you'll notice a much larger jump in the progress and the return you get on that, assuming you can recover from that, say, 6 set increase, than you
Mm,
will from going from, say, 10 sets to 16 sets, and
yeah.
even less going from 16 to 22. So if you're currently doing something that is, say, in the realm of 15 sets or lower versus 15 sets or higher per muscle group per week, then there's much less potential to get a benefit from increasing volume.
Mm,
So then we need to look at, well, what other variables are there, right? And especially if I'm not feeling like I could recover from much more or my time constraints are there. Like, oh, well, I can't do anything more. Like, well, no, no, no. There's a lot of other things you can do. Exercises are not all created equal. Proximity to failure could be manipulated.
mm,
Now, proximity to failure is one of those things where there's a very, very small benefit towards being closer and closer to failure, but
mm,
it's additive,
yeah.
right? So I mean, there's not a huge difference from even a 5 RIR and a 0 RIR, at least in like untrained
Mm,
people. Trained people, maybe there's a difference, but frankly, as long as you're training reasonably close to failure, you're getting a pretty similar stimulus. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a difference. It's just very small.
Yeah.
But again, it is additive. So if
Mm.
someone is already doing a high volume protocol, let's say they're doing 20 sets, right? Typically, they're not taking all those sets to failure. They may even be taking them maybe suboptimally too far from failure to accommodate those 20 sets.
Yeah.
So when someone comes to me and they're on a moderately high or high volume protocol and they want to try to optimize things further, I'd suggest that they work on trying to train a little bit closer to failure on average. I'm not say push
Mm.
everything to failure, but if your average RIR is 2 to 3 and you're doing 20 sets, instead of thinking, what's the next thing I can do to progress? Should I push it up to 25 sets? I'd be like, no,
Mm.
let's get you down to 1 to 2 because
Mm.
that small additive benefit is
Yeah.
happening across 20 to 25 sets, right?
Mm.
So there's much more potential for getting something out of that. Like for example, there was a recent study that I think Schoenfeld's group did where they took a low volume, like 2 to 4 sets per muscle group if we're counting indirect sets or fractional sets rather, and they had one group trained completely to failure, another one trained at 2 RIR, and they got marginally better gains in the failure group, right? And this is an argument too. Like on the other side of the coin, if you're only doing a small amount of volume, you better make sure all of it's really effective, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But interestingly enough, it's that difference would probably be magnified if you had those two groups doing twice as much volume, and
Hmm.
one group was at a 2IR and another group was closer to failure. Or at least that's my hypothesis because of that small additive benefit. So I think it's just important to understand that. And there's so many things you can do to get the most bang out of your buck out of a limited amount of time.
Hmm.
That's often the constraint, or recovery capacity, sleep, what have you. So I know I didn't directly answer your question about what's the best way to track recovery, but
Hmm.
ultimately it's there. It's not HRV. It's not anything else.
Hmm.
It's like can I sleep well and do I feel good and
Yeah.
can I do it is really the real
Mm.
question. Can
Yeah.
I meet the constraints of the program?
Mhm.
And then making sure that whatever program you're trying to get to, that you don't just jump right into it, you build up to it. I think
Mm.
that's the main mistake people make is they want to start a high volume program and they're motivated and they jump up 50% in the number of sets they're doing. I think you should go up like 20%.
Mm.
Increase your frequency after a frequency change. So take
Yeah.
your current volume, split it out over more days, wait till you notice you're getting a little bit less DOMs, and then jump your volume up no more than a quarter. And then
Mm.
run that for 2 months and then see how it goes and do it again. That's the approach you would want to take.
Yeah.
Um, and before you do that, I think there's lower hanging fruit of what's my proximity to failure? Can I modify that? Do I really have effective exercise execution and selection?
Mm.
There's so much to be had there. So I think quality before quantity is generally a good rule of thumb.
Hmm. Yeah. Amazing advice there. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I think for me, what motivation was a big factor. Like I was finding it hard to commit to 5 sessions a week outside of work and obviously dad duties and stuff. And it was that was playing into it as well, I think. And yeah, hence the drop from 5 to 4. But yeah, I'm all for training body parts multiple times a week as well. That makes more sense. Yeah, I ditched the bro split many years ago. Although sometimes I still look at guys training like a full session of back, and I kind of get a little bit jealous, like 5 or 6 different back movements. And I think I I miss those days of just doing like one body part per session. But yeah,
I
yeah,
get it, man.
yeah.
Like so I have experimented with so many different frequency combinations to look at what's the total amount of effort, high effort work under the curve that I can get in a given microcycle.
Mm,
And I think that's something that not a lot of bodybuilders do,
mm,
or they do it, but they don't actually really experiment. Like, oh, I try to push pull legs and upper lower. I'm like, all right, bro, like let's 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 talk about being, like coloring within the lines here.
mm,
When in 2018 I experimented with just alternating upper lower days.
mm,
And then I was like, well, like some of my smaller muscle groups that I need to grow, like is it are the police gonna arrest me if I did a hamstring curl on upper day? You
mm.
know? And then that evolved into eventually me experimenting with various unrestricted approaches. And what I've landed on, full body push, full body pull
Right,
because
right.
I feel like the biggest thing that constrains my ability to do a fair amount of work is like trying to do leg days, as an
Mm,
example.
mm,
Um, like having to do quads, glutes, like 60% of the muscle in your body, they're big, strong muscles, and we normally train them with these pretty extreme, like free weight, complex movements that
Yep.
can beat you up pretty good. So it's like if I come in, like if I told someone that I do uh like 9 to 12 sets of squats or a squat pattern per week,
Yeah.
9 to 12 sets of a leg extension pattern per week. And they think of that in a typical leg day. And also on the top that I do 9 to 12 sets of hinging across, good morning deadlifts and RDLs, nine
Mm.
to 12 sets of hamstring curls across seated and lying. And then, 20 plus sets of calves. They'd be like, oh my God, your leg days must be crazy. I'm like, I don't have
Mm.
leg days.
Right.
I
Yeah.
do I do 3 sets of leg press, 3 sets of leg extension, 3 sets of calf raise, and the next day I do 3 sets of good mornings, 3 sets of leg curls, 3 sets of calf raises, and then I alternate that.
Yeah.
They go, oh, that actually sounds hard, but it is, but it is so much more manageable to
Mm.
come in and do 6 sets of quads and then move on to my upper body pushing movements, or six
Yeah.
sets of glutes and hams, and then move on to upper body pulling. So, like I have looked at, okay, how many sets am I doing with this split across the week? How many sets am I doing across this split without the week? What are my session RPEs? What RIR am I maintaining? And which one has felt harder or easier? And there's sometimes it's like a 30% greater number of total sets per week, but it feels the same or easier by just
Mm.
distributing it in an intelligent way.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Um, so I remember being time constrained during my PhD. I don't have kids, so like I'm in a privileged position. I work for myself. I work from home. I'm a 10-minute walk from the AUT gym,
Mm.
and my lifestyle is built around being a bodybuilder, right?
Yeah.
So that gives me the affordable opportunity to do some things, but I'm still incredibly busy.
Mm.
And in my busiest times, I actually found that training fewer sessions was not the answer, but training
Yeah.
more sessions with shorter that were under an hour. Like I can almost always find an hour, and I can't
Yeah.
work productively for 12 hours straight anyway. And anyone says they does, it's actually got some pretty dead hours in there, right? So during my PhD, when I tried to do three 2.5 hour long sessions, I got crushed.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started doing 6 or 7 45-minute sessions, all of a sudden I was like, oh, hold on. And I learned something. So, I was working in a building that had a gym.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sports science PhD, right? So
Yeah.
sneak down to the
Mm-hmm.
sports hall, get my 45 minutes in, get the headphones in, and then go right back to work. And I could do that daily. And I was like, I'm actually accruing a fair amount of work here.
Mm.
Instead of slogging through this 2.5 hour session that I set aside and like getting psyched up for it and needing to take a pre-workout and all that
Mm.
stuff. So I think leveraging non-traditional splits and organization, even two-a-days and things like that,
Yeah.
can make higher volumes become much more manageable. And if you
Mm.
have like a home gym or a gym right across the street, and you don't think that I need to be in an hour-long multi-set, multi-exercise, must-train chest and back type of approach, and you get a little more creative, and you go, where can I fit these things in?
Mm.
All of a sudden, you find ways to make the same program easier.
Yeah.
And you can combine things like you talked about, like a whole back day. Like, well, what if
Mm.
you have a weak point? Like what if you do, like a full body push, full body pull, full body push, full body pull, and then you have a weak point day, and you decide I'm going to go in there and do 4 back exercises if that's what you need to work
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
They can be combined, but people don't program like that. They
Mm.
feel a little intimidated by their ability to manipulate that, or they want to feel a pump in a given region,
Yeah.
or they want to feel like they've really, you know, like the subjective feel prevents them from committing to something like that typically.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I think bodybuilders typically are a bit too OCD for that level of coming away from coming away from things. But yeah, they're really interesting, and that's a great point about splitting sessions into shorter sessions with your time. If you're constrained with time, that's I haven't heard that before, but it makes sense. Um, One area I quickly wanted to touch on, Eric, obviously I'm aware of your time here, is going back to the stage, is that balance between like size and shape. Something I've experienced that every time I've competed is just getting that balance of kind of condition and yeah, while still maintaining shape. Obviously, the symmetry around shape is vital, but then as you get into muscularity, yeah, condition becomes very important as well. Um, when it comes to your own physique, do you find that there's like a sweet spot where size and condition are in a good place, but digging deeper actually has a detrimental look on your physique?
I think it's all about how you dig, and this is
Okay.
something, um, yeah, like I really don't buy, here's the thing. When you only have a couple of pounds of subcutaneous fat left to lose, you need to think of it differently than when you have 10, 15, or 20.
Yeah.
You can't rush the process. You can't maintain the typical rates of weight loss. You have to really give yourself far more time than you think you need.
Mhm.
And then you have to accept that to lose those last little bits of fat, you will sometimes flatten out in other areas.
Mm.
And you need to do something about that because that chronic flatness will turn into muscle loss. So there's several strategies on the board. One is that you need to have, refeeds built in, so that or just a slower rate of loss and more time, uh, or ideally, you get to a point where you are flattened out. You are seeing, oh, this is not great, but you're ready early, and then
Yeah.
you have time to refill back up. So targeted refeeds, to where you can put your training in states where you feel full, you have energy, and you can train the muscle groups that tend to flatten out. Slow rate of loss, so you got 3 kilos left to lose, but you got 8 weeks to do it,
Hmm.
12 weeks to do it, versus where you might have done that in half that time earlier in prep. I think it's really important.
Mm.
Over the course of, let's say, a 30-week prep for someone who needs to lose 12 kilos, you're probably going to lose 10 of those in 18 weeks,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that kind of thing is what I'm talking about. And then you lose the last little bit, and then you have a 4-week period of eating up to restore that fullness.
Mm.
And now all of a sudden, that same person who was, oh, I don't want to get that lean because I sacrifice shape and I lose
Mhm.
size here and there, they're able to come onto stage with the combination, the best combination possible.
Yeah.
So I think that perspective is typically what's needed. So for me, getting ready early and babysitting the last little bit, or using refeeds and diet breaks has been pretty critical.
Interesting. Okay. Can you recall times where your best look has been, say, in the middle of the season rather than the last show? Has that happened to you before?
Yeah, early on in my career,
Okay.
where I lost so much chasing condition that, because I was, going too fast, going too hard, I didn't really know what it took. But
Mm.
ever since then, the leaner I get, the better I look because I know how to mitigate that muscle loss.
Yeah. No,
And
really good point.
and yeah, pretty persistently when I look at higher level bodybuilders who are still experiencing that, is they
Mm.
haven't really gotten those concepts that I just discussed earlier about, starting lean enough. They either start too heavy, so they,
Yeah.
they never have the ability to time to get ready early enough. They don't eat up, and they don't take kind of these push and pull approaches. They just tend to linearly reduce calories, so they lose like a
Hmm.
pound a week the whole way through.
Mm.
Um, that's what they did. They know how to do it. They feel better about seeing themselves getting leaner, and then they either persistently kind of get decent shape and decent leanness, but they're unwilling to push to the last bit because they think they lose it,
Hmm.
and they just haven't really tried a different approach.
Yeah. Really good advice there. Yeah. That's something to yeah, to be aware of. Yeah, really, really good. Well, Eric, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. As I do with all my guests, we're going to do some quick fire questions to end the podcast. What is your favorite film?
My favorite film, I think, is Fight Club.
Wow. Okay.
That, yeah, yeah, I think Edward Norton and Brad Pitt did such a good job in that.
Yeah,
Um, and the book it's based upon is also quite good and very similar. Chuck
I've read the
Palahniuk,
book.
he had a
Yeah,
really
yeah,
good run. Yeah, so Fight Club is probably one of my favorite films. It's excellent.
great film. 26 years old now as well. That's which is nuts. Yeah, yeah,
It's bonkers, man. Yeah, it really
yeah.
is.
Crazy. What are your hobbies outside of bodybuilding?
That's hilarious.
Mhm.
There's very few. No, so I'm an incredibly I have diverse interests, but I also tend to be obsessive. So, like for example, I study the history of strength and physique sport.
Mm.
I obviously like the philosophy behind it. I've even published in like some joint philosophy papers. I like the nutrition. I like the training. I like the psychology. But that's not to say I don't do anything else.
Yeah.
I have been playing like Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games since I was a kid. and still
Right.
do with a group online. And I read
Mhm.
fantasy and sci-fi. So there's definitely a pretty big nerd in me.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, yeah. No, I love sci-fi as well. Yeah. Have you read the Expanse books?
Expanse books are excellent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Love
S.A.
those.
Corey, who's
Mm.
the two authors together.
Hmm.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I've read those and all the novellas that go with them as well. Brilliant books. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
great.
they're very good, man.
Final question. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Hmm.
Not really quick
Man.
fire. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one to answer quick. I
Mm.
would say to my younger self is more intentionally define your values. I think that because I had the same values I have now, but I don't think I always had them at the forefront of my mind. And when you have a very clear set of values and you know what's important to you, it's easier to say yes or to say no to opportunities that come your way because
Mm.
some things are in line with your values, but they might be a good opportunity. But then are they? Because they're actually just going to take you off course a little bit.
Mm.
Or they might be neutral to your values, and this is more what I dealt with, but they take time and distraction away from the people or the things you care about. And it just makes it harder to do the things that you say your values are and to be the person you want to be because you're spending all this time doing other things, whether it's for, convenience, money,
Mm.
fun, whatever.
Mm.
So yeah, be have more clarity on your values would probably be my advice to my younger
Ah,
self.
love that. That's a really interesting one. Well, Eric, this has been, yeah, once again, amazing fun for me. I've really enjoyed this chat. I'm sure the viewers and listeners will as well. Yeah, thanks again for joining me. This has been a ton of fun.
No, it's a true pleasure. Thank you for giving me the honor of being on. Thank you for the questions, and I hope this was beneficial for everybody listening.
I'm sure it will be. You're welcome, Eric. And yeah, thank you guys for watching and for listening. And we'll see you next time. Cheers.